Why certain men must separate to succeed isn't about ego, it's about focus, and I've learned that the hard way. Sometimes you've got to step back from noise, from crowds, even from people you love, just to hear your own calling. Not everyone is meant to walk every mile with you, and that's okay, because growth often demands distance. When you're alone, you build discipline, you sharpen your vision, and you meet the man you're supposed to become. So don't fear separation, embrace it, because purpose is often found in silence, not applause. 1. Separation builds focus and clarity. 2. Distance protects purpose from distraction. 3. Solitude strengthens discipline and self-belief. Separation builds focus and clarity, and that truth sounds simple until you really live it, because most men don't realize how much noise they're carrying until they finally step away from it, and suddenly the mind gets quiet, the air feels lighter, and for the first time in a long while, they can't actually hear themselves think, and that's where real growth begins, not in the crowd, not in constant conversations, not in endless opinions, but in that uncomfortable silence where excuses have nowhere to hide and responsibility shows up uninvited, because when a man separates himself, even for a season, he stops reacting and starts reflecting, he stops chasing approval and starts chasing alignment, and clarity doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It creeps in slowly through long mornings, lonely nights, unanswered questions, and deep self-talk that forces him to ask who he really is and where he's actually going. And honestly, that process isn't glamorous, it's boring, it's frustrating, it's humbling, but it's powerful, because focus is born when distractions are removed. And most distractions come disguised as people, habits, routines, and comfort zones that feel safe but keep you small, and the moment you create distance from them, your energy stops leaking in every direction and starts flowing toward one purpose, one vision, one mission, and that's when progress accelerates, because focus isn't about doing more, it's about doing less with intention, and separation gives you that gift by stripping life down to essentials, showing you what matters and what never did, and clarity follows because without constant outside influence, your inner voice grows stronger, your instincts sharpen, and decisions stop feeling confusing. You no longer wake up wondering what to do next, because your direction becomes obvious, not easy, but obvious, and that's a huge difference, because confusion drains men, it makes them hesitant, inconsistent, and emotionally tired, while clarity fuels action, discipline, and confidence, even when the path is hard. And what many don't understand is that clarity isn't something you find, it's something you earn through separation, through time alone with your thoughts, through choosing purpose over popularity and growth over comfort. And this is why certain men must separate to succeed, because their calling is too heavy to be carried in a crowded room, their future is too demanding to be built in constant distraction, and their potential is too valuable to be wasted on noise. And yes, separation will cost you relationships, misunderstandings, and sometimes loneliness, but what it gives back is far greater. It gives you direction, self-respect, and an unshakable sense of who you are. And when a man knows who he is, he stops explaining himself, he stops begging for validation, and he stops settling for less than what aligns with his vision. And that's clarity in its purest form, knowing what to say no to just as clearly as what to say yes to. And focus grows stronger because your time becomes sacred, your energy becomes guarded, and your mind becomes disciplined. You stop scrolling aimlessly, talking endlessly, and reacting emotionally. Instead, you start planning, building, learning, and executing, and over time, this focused state compounds, small wins stack up, confidence rises, and momentum builds, and suddenly the man who once felt lost now moves with purpose, not because life got easier, but because his mind got clearer, and separation played a key role in that transformation, because clarity requires space, just like vision requires distance to see the full picture, and without that space, men stay stuck in cycles, repeating the same mistakes, chasing the same distractions, and wondering why nothing changes. But the moment they step back, detach, and commit to solitude, even Temporarily, their perspective shifts. They start noticing patterns, recognizing weaknesses, and identifying strengths they never knew they had, and that awareness becomes power, because a man who understands himself can control himself, and a man who controls himself can build anything, and that's why separation isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's the training ground where focus is sharpened and clarity is forged. And when that man eventually returns to the world, he doesn't come back desperate for attention or approval. He comes back grounded, intentional, and unstoppable, because he knows where he's going and why, and nothing shakes a man who walks with that kind of clarity, not criticism, not delay, not failure, because his focus is internal, his vision is clear, and his purpose is non-negotiable, all born from the courage to step away when everyone else stayed distracted. Distance protects purpose from distraction, and that idea cuts deep once you realize how fragile purpose really is, because it doesn't collapse from one big failure. It slowly erodes through constant interruptions, misplaced loyalty, emotional noise, and the pressure to stay accessible to everyone. Accept yourself, and that's why certain men must create distance, not out of arrogance, not out of anger, but out of respect for the vision they carry, because purpose needs protection the same way a seed needs soil, water, and time away from trampling feet. And the world doesn't tiptoe around your dreams. It crowds them, questions them, laughs at them, and drains them, often unintentionally, through endless opinions, expectations, and demands. And when a man doesn't guard his distance, he starts living reactively, answering messages, attending events, explaining plans, and slowly drifting away from the work he was called to do. And what's dangerous is that distraction rarely feels like danger. It feels like connection, responsibility, kindness, and being needed. But underneath that comfort is a quiet theft of focus, energy, and momentum, and distance steps in as a boundary, a line drawn not to keep people out forever, but to keep purpose alive long enough to mature. Because when everyone has access to you, everything has influence over you, and influence shapes direction, often without permission, and that's how men lose years, not through laziness, but through constant engagement with things that don't move the mission forward. And distance solves that by creating space to breathe, think, and execute without interruption. And in that space, purpose gets louder while distractions fade into background noise, and clarity sharpens because there's less emotional clutter pulling the mind in 10 directions, and a man begins to recognize that not every call deserves an answer, not every opinion deserves consideration, and not every relationship deserves proximity. And that realization is uncomfortable because it forces hard choices, but those choices are the price of progress, because purpose demands sacrifice, and one of the first sacrifices is availability. And distance teaches discipline by limiting access, helping a man say no without guilt and yes with intention. And over time, that discipline becomes strength, because he no longer feels torn between pleasing others and honoring his path. He chooses alignment over approval, and peace follows, not because life is quiet, but because his priorities are clear, and distraction loses its grip. And distance also reveals who truly supports the mission and who only supports convenience, because when access is reduced, intentions are exposed, and that awareness protects purpose from being hijacked by expectations that were never yours to carry. And the truth is, most breakthroughs happen when nobody's watching, when there's no applause, no validation, just commitment and consistency. And distance creates that environment, allowing a man to work in silence, refine his craft, and build resilience without external pressure. And that process strengthens purpose because it's no longer dependent on encouragement. It's rooted in conviction, and conviction doesn't need an audience. It needs commitment, and distraction weakens commitment by constantly shifting attention, while distance anchors it, making purpose stable even during doubt, fatigue, or slow progress. And this is why men who achieve something meaningful often go quiet before they go big, because they understand that focus thrives in isolation, and purpose grows when protected from comparison, competition, and constant commentary, and distance shields the mind from measuring progress against others, allowing growth to happen at its own pace, which is crucial because comparison is one of the most destructive distractions, making men rush, quit, or change direction prematurely, and distance removes that pressure, reminding a man that his race is his own, and his timing doesn't need external validation, and as distance deepens, so does self-trust, because decisions are made internally rather than outsourced to opinions, and that builds confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that doesn't shake under criticism, and purpose becomes stronger because it's no longer fragile, no longer easily influenced, and no longer dependent on constant reassurance, and distance also restores energy, because constant interaction drains mental and emotional reserves, leaving little left for creation, while solitude replenishes focus, sharpening attention and allowing deeper work, and deeper work produces meaningful results, which reinforces purpose and fuels momentum, and slowly, a man notices that he's moving forward again, not because he's doing more, but because he's protecting what matters, and distraction loses its power because it no longer has access, and purpose flourishes because it finally has room to breathe, grow, and evolve without interference. And when that man eventually re-engages with the world, he does so from a position of strength, not need, offering value rather than seeking validation, because his purpose is intact, guarded, and grounded, and that's the reward of distance, not loneliness, but alignment, not isolation, but intention, and not separation for ego, but separation for survival, because without distance, purpose starves, and with it, purpose thrives, steady, focused, and protected from the noise that once threatened to pull it apart. Solitude strengthens discipline and self-belief, and that's a lesson most men only learn after life strips away the noise and leaves them face to face with themselves. Because when you're alone, there's no one to impress, no one to blame, and no one to lean on. And in that quiet space, discipline either forms or falls apart, because solitude exposes habits, weaknesses, and excuses that were easy to hide in company, and at first, it feels uncomfortable, even unsettling, because the mind looks for distraction, for validation, for something familiar, but solitude doesn't negotiate, it demands structure, routine, and self-control, and that's where discipline is born, not from motivation, not from hype, but from repetition in silence, doing what needs to be done when nobody's watching and nobody's clapping, and over time, those small acts of consistency stack up, waking up early, sticking to plans, finishing what you start, and slowly, a man realizes he's becoming reliable to himself, and that's powerful because self-belief doesn't come from words, it comes from proof, and solitude provides that proof daily through kept promises and quiet wins, and as discipline grows, so does confidence, not the loud, showy kind, but the grounded kind that doesn't seek attention, because a man who's disciplined in solitude knows what he's capable of, and he doesn't need external validation to confirm it, and that inner certainty becomes unshakable because it's built on experience, not opinion. And solitude also removes comparison, which is one of the biggest threats to self-belief, because when you're constantly around others, it's easy to measure yourself against their progress, their lifestyle, their success, and that comparison breeds doubt, impatience, and insecurity. But in solitude, the only competition is yesterday's version of yourself, and that focus strengthens belief, because progress becomes personal, internal, and honest, and discipline deepens because there's no shortcut, no distraction to hide behind, and no one to carry you through hard days, and hard days or where discipline is forged when motivation is gone and excuses feel convincing, but solitude demands action anyway, and each time you push through, self-respect grows and self-belief follows because you start trusting your ability to endure, adapt, and overcome, and that trust changes how you move in the world. You walk taller, speak calmer, and make decisions with confidence, not because everything is perfect, but because you've proven to yourself that you can handle imperfection. And solitude also teaches patience, because growth feels slower when you're alone. There's no instant feedback, no praise, no reassurance, just steady effort, and patience strengthens discipline by training you to commit long-term, to delay gratification, and to stay consistent even when results aren't visible, and that patience feeds self-belief because you stop doubting the process, you stop rushing outcomes, and you stop quitting early, trusting that effort will compound over time. And solitude sharpens focus too, because without constant interaction, the mind learns to stay with one task, one goal, one direction, and focus reinforces discipline, because scattered effort weakens habits while concentrated effort strengthens them, and as habits solidify, identity shifts, and a man no longer says he's trying to be disciplined. He knows he is, because his daily actions confirm it. And identity-based discipline is powerful, because it doesn't rely on mood, it relies on standards, and standards build self-belief, because you know you'll show up regardless of how you feel. And solitude also forces honesty, because there's no audience to lie to, and that honesty builds integrity, aligning actions with values. And when a man lives in alignment, self-belief becomes natural, because there's no internal conflict draining his confidence, and discipline becomes simpler, because decisions are guided by principle, not impulse. And solitude strengthens emotional control as well, because you learn to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. And emotional control supports discipline by reducing impulsive reactions, helping a man respond thoughtfully rather than react emotionally. And that emotional maturity deepens self-belief, because you trust yourself under pressure, knowing you won't sabotage your own progress. And over time, solitude transforms from something feared into something respected, because it becomes the space where discipline is refined and belief is reinforced day by day, quietly, consistently. And when that man eventually steps back into the world, he carries a different energy, calm, steady, self-assured, not because he's better than others, but because he's mastered himself, and self-mastery is the highest form of confidence. And that's why solitude isn't weakness, it's training. It's where discipline becomes a lifestyle and self-belief becomes unbreakable, because a man who's strong alone will never be lost in a crowd, never be shaken by doubt, and never be dependent on approval, standing firm on the foundation he built in silence.